Welcome everyone to another episode of the Old-Timers Comic Book Show, where the hosts aren't old, but the comics most certainly are. Joining me as always for this fantastic event, non-event special, we have the 13th Crusader and of course, the Professor. Gents, how's it going?
It's going very well, Johnny. How are you today?
I am hunky and both Dory.
Was
Yeah, so for the UK listeners and the European listeners to the show, I hope everyone's enjoying the European Football Championships. Come on, England! Just saying that out loud. We're not doing so well. We should have beat the Scots, but we didn't. So, ho hum. For everybody else who's in not sports but comics, we have got 3 corkers for you. These are pretty much. How did we describe this?
It was the events in comics that weren't like event books, so they weren't like event driven. It was just they happened to be eventful. So
eventful non-events.
Eventful non-events. So that's right. There is nary a crisis nor a secret wars to be found in any of these books.
But they are just about as good as those books.
If not better. Better. Because there's no sort of like editorial mandate. I don't know who was beeping there, but someone's either the food's ready or your truck's backing up. One of the two.
No, it was here, and I have no idea what it was. So,
like, ding, which is technology for like turkey is done. All right, okay. So eventful non-events. We're going to start off with, well, it's our show. This is the Old-Timers. It's bound to be a classic. We're going to start off with. We're going to go with the 13th choice for a change first. And we are going with, how do you pronounce this? It is Legion of Superheroes, The Great Darkness Saga. There you go. Oh, look at that cover. So, some deets on this before we let 13th go ballistic on it. Where are my notes? There they are. Legion of Superheroes, The Great Darkness Saga covers Legion of Superheroes 13th, correct me if I'm wrong, issues 287, 290 to 294.
Yep.
Does it include the annuals as well?
Yep.
So that's annual 1 and 3. God knows what happened in number 2. So there you go. It's written by Paul Levitz, who was back then an absolute head honcho at DC Comics. It's got art by Pat Broderick, Larry Mercite, Keith Giffen, Kurt Swan, Romeo Tanghal, and the letters, would you believe it? The letters are by none other than Adam Kubert. That's the same Kubert that ended up working on X-Men and Batman in the 90s and thereafter. Cool. There you go. Well, I'm going to say something straight away. I have an issue with Legion Superheroes. So where I live in the UK, the term lad and lass are not great terms. You know, it's like, so you call your wife or your girlfriend our lass. That's what we say. Yeah. So, and then of course, lad is like our lad, as if they, going to give grief to somebody. So every time I look at Legion of Superhero books with all the lads and lasses in it, I'm kind of like, what's going on? So I'm a bit of a newbie to Legion of Superheroes. One of those books that I think I wanted to read but never got around to. However, 13th, I know these are your like upper echelon characters for you. So why don't you take this one away? Take us away then.
It has left a lasting impression on me.
I hope that's the lasting joke that we get from you. I doubt that's going to happen, of course.
Well, yeah, the Great Darkness Saga, it involves obviously the Legion of Superheroes, but the Legion of Superheroes, basically, the title is pretty much gives it away, right? A legion of heroes. So this takes place well into the future of DC Comics, almost 1,000 years from way back when. And basically, to this point, the Legion has gone through a lot of different members, a lot of different adventures. Superboy from the past went to the future, joined the team. Same for Kara Zor-El, Supergirl. So they've had their moments, and they've had, you know, they've been around for quite some time. I think we mentioned it on one of the past shows. Jim Shooter, I think, got his start on Legion of Superheroes. So, you know, it's been around for quite some time. But one of the things that makes this book so great is you can take the Legion, a very formidable force in the future, and then challenge them in a way that they would never challenge. And basically, you have probably the greatest writer of the Legion of Superheroes ever, in Paul Levitz, coming up with this idea, like, how do we do this? But we're going to do this involving every single Legion member, some of their allies. But what's such a formidable force that can get all the Legion together and basically go to war against this threat? And that answer was Darkseid. And it worked. It worked very well for this point in time, because, you know, let's just face it, you really need you know, it's hard to keep together the amount of characters that are involved with the Legion of Superheroes. So not only was this idea concocted, but to be able to write and script this thing, keep it all together, make the story, flesh out the story, give personalities to these characters. It's a challenge. And then you don't want to mess up writing Darkseid either. So, you know, there's that challenge. And the same from the artistic perspective, right? It's a lot of characters. You're like, okay, what's their costume? What do they do? What are their powers? You know, how do I give emotion to the script? So, you know, there's a lot of things that went into this. But most importantly, as for the readers, if you've never picked up a Legion of Superheroes book ever, have no fear. You don't really need that much Legion experience to enjoy the story. You're going to see, this might be a treat for you. You're going to learn or get exposed to a lot of members of the Legion of Superheroes. But if you are a fan of Darkseid, but you haven't really ventured into the past, this is a good story to kind of read. So basically, what I love about this story is Darkseid, for whatever reason, was not around for 2,000 years, but lo and behold, here he is. So I'm like, okay, what happened in between then? But long story short, once Darkseid is back, we already know what his mission is. The mission never changes. It's always about death. It's always about darkness and conquering the universe, or universes. But what I think this storyline pretty much cemented for Darkseid was pretty much say to the world, Darkseid is the cosmic villain. This pretty much put Darkseid on the map for the amount of power that he actually has, and how much of a tactician he was, and how immensely powerful he was. Like, he tore through the Legion like nothing. And the fact that throughout the story, he brings back his minions from Apocalypse, not the minions from the cartoon, although that would have been awesome. Exactly. He just sends them to do his dirty work. He didn't even need to get that involved. So the Legion, you know, thousands of years in the future, they had no idea who Darkseid really was, because they just considered him a myth. But now they knew that, you know, that he was real and that he was a threat. They never really explained what happened to him other than he was gone, but he came back. And the Legion ultimately, you know, they had to call in every member they've ever had, including the substitute of Legion, a Legion of Superheroes. So it was a who's who of Legionnaires. You see a lot of emotion through here, especially with the older members of the group. There are a lot of little things, sidebar stories happening here, but it all came together, was well gelled, and ultimately, through mystic means, the ability to defeat Darkseid came about in the form of the High Baby, who eventually turns to be the High Father. So,
we're talking babies. Oh, not again! Didn't we do it? Didn't we have enough babies last time with Miss Marvel? I'm like, I can't believe we've gone down babies again.
So the premise really is that, you know, if darkness exists, if in dark side, Highfather will exist as in the form of the light to defeat dark side. But it really brought together kind of that new gods world to a point, meshed in with the Legion of Superheroes. So it was awesome. Dark side, can we say that he lost? He didn't get his goal of achieving ultimate darkness, but he didn't leave empty-handed. I'm not going to spoil it for anybody. It just put Darkseid in a different light in this point in time, because prior to this you had him in New Gods, Jack Kirby and everything else, but it was pretty much relegated to Apocalypse. Now here, this is like universe spanning, cosmic level threat. And far in the future, where only the Legion really was the only group of heroes that could respond.
All right, then. So let me ask you a question, and this, Professor, feel free to jump in on this.
Yeah.
Is Darkseid DC's version of all clicky fingers Thanos?
It's the opposite.
Well, yeah, I think Thanos is probably the answer, Marvel's answer to Darkseid. So, for me, and I do have a question about Darkseid. So,
fire away. We've got a Darkseid expert on the show.
Yeah. So is this his first appearance outside of the New God stuff?
Honestly, I'll have to look into that. I'm not sure, but I think it's his biggest, most significant appearance after New Gods.
Okay, because I mean, I think it is. I think that he hadn't appeared in anything non-Jack Kirby until this, which is why they say he's a myth, and he hadn't appeared in 1,000 years, right? So, to me, I thought this was kind of like almost like a coming out party for Darkseid, as opposed like for someone else writing him, and that. To even see like all these, they all look the same. All of his minions that look like that, like covered in volcano ash or something, you know. But there's like a clone of Superman in there, and a Orion who, that's I guess maybe a spoiler who hasn't read the Great Darkness Saga. You had 40 years to read it, so spoiler alert.
You are ruthless with those spoilers, I tell you. You just go in there.
Yeah, and early on, he transforms Mordru, right, into one of his minions as well. So that, to me, it does kind of give Darkseid that level of power and that level of cosmic threat that I don't think that you'd seen. I don't think you'd seen a lot of. Well, I can't say that you haven't seen a lot of cosmic stuff, because DC's full of cosmic stuff. But with Legion, and this is probably the first Legion storyline that I ever read before I really got into the Legion, in spite of myself, because of the cast of characters that was in there. I was very intimidated. And I've told you before that that with the DC in general, I'm pretty intimidated by the continuity and just the amount of stuff. Legion, you need a guidebook, really. You should really have a primer on who the characters are before you ever start reading Legion. But
that's a shout. That is a good shout. I always thought Shadowlass was class.
Yeah.
Just the aesthetic of it when I was a kid. Every time I picked up a Legion comic, she was on the cover. I'd flip through the cover, through the comic. She's hardly ever in it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, but you look through like every issue, you're like, who's this guy? Who's this guy? Oh, who's this guy? But I want to shout out, so Paul Levitz did a great job, and even Jim Shooter before him, of really kind of fleshing out the characters and trying to make each of the characters as important as the other ones. There's no main star in this book, right? So it's not like Wolverine and the X-Men. The Legion is the Legion, and sometimes someone takes center stage, and sometimes other characters take center stage. They cycle through leaders in the Legion, just like the Avengers do, or and every character eventually will get their time to shine. If it's not this issue, it's next issue or the issue after that. And I do think Paul Levitt's very adept even in this within this storyline, kind of shifting the focus, having different people off doing different things, almost feels like those old Justice League issues where we have the chapter 1, 2, and 3 where they split the team up.
That's a great shout. Definitely, it's a tried and trusted formula. Definitely.
Right, but you almost need that, right, to give the focus on the different characters. And the only thing that really maybe irked me a little bit is it seems like every character in the Legion is paired off with another character. Like you're like, who's the love interest? Like they're involved, and who's with who, and almost every single character is like, every single female character is hooked up with one of the male characters.
That would be an interesting title instead of who's with who.
Who's with who? Yeah. It's interesting, and I want to just shout out Giffen, right? Look at this art. This is Giffen's art as it evolved into the 80s, right? But even in this very issue, the previous story is penciled by Giffen too. It almost looks like two different pencilers. So it's you can actually see his style evolving, and I in the pages of Legion. I think that's interesting. And he gets way more radical than this. This actually looks like Giffen, but he gets, do you want to say messy? Does he get messy in the future issues of Legion? Not really messy, but I mean, like, there's a lot of stuff going on.
A lot. Yeah, I think you've said it before how DC's art felt kind of stuck.
Yeah.
And I think Keith Giffen is probably one of those of the early 80s who was trying to sort of modernize the art.
Trying to break his style up.
Yeah, a little bit, because both DC and Marvel at the minute, I think has got a horrendous house style when it comes to art. But we're going to talk about Marvel house style in a little bit, I suppose. But for me, Giffen, I think really, I'm not sure if I prefer him as an artist or a writer, because he does some good stuff later on. But yeah, I agree with you. And Mary 13th, you can kind of like answer this for everyone who's looking at this book. When I look at Legion, I'm with the professor on this. I get a little bit worried about all the characters going on that I have no idea who they are, and there never seem to be a really good jumping on point. Yeah. So I mean, that's quite intimidating. I mean, we talked about X-Men in the past and how, I mean, they're quite continuity bound, but Legion, I mean, there's a cast of thousands.
Almost literally, Johnny. Yeah. Almost literally a cast of thousands. And even it gets even worse once Crisis happens, and then you have to kind of reset everything. And then they had the Legionnaires later on in the 90s with all these different characters and reboots. And I mean, there's a reason that DC hasn't published a Legion book in a long time, right?
Well, honestly, the way I look at this, the way to approach this, I know you guys said the word intimidation, but so yeah, it can be intimidating. But if Darkseid doesn't get you interested into reading a Legion of Superhero, then to me, you're missing out on a Darkseid saga, really. Okay. And this pretty much, again, you got to look at the era, right? So at this point, the Legion had hundreds of stories throughout decades, and yeah, it could be intimidating. Like as a collector, like, can you honestly say that I only know one person that has every single Legion appearance? That's just one person. But will they know it all? Probably not. So to keep it together can be a challenge, but I just tend to simplify it, right? So I'm like, okay, I got to look at this as Darkseid is back in the future, and who can his opponent be? And that kind of helped me get through the story. Yeah, there's characters in here that I haven't seen in years, but I enjoyed the story nonetheless for what it is.
I have a story for you. So this is how I got into the Legion of Superheroes, right? About 30 years ago, I walk into my local comic book shop, and Sandy, the lady that ran the shop, says, "Bud, I got a long box of comics, and I'll sell you the whole box for like $50." and I didn't know what was in it. And she said, you're just gonna, take the whole box. I opened it up, started flipping through it, and it was every single issue, big long box, the Legion of Superheroes, and it was probably it was like everything from I think the 1990 or whatever back, and way before Great Darkness Saga too. So so well into the Bronze Age 70s issues of Legion, and I was like, okay, I'll take it, because I had never read Legion before, and I was like, I'll just take it so I can read the stories, and I almost needed that whole box to kind of get used to all the characters.
Let's put it this way too, like Legion, right? Again, like you guys make a good point. It is a tough sell. However, isn't that why we had Superboy in there? Isn't that why we've had Supergirl in there? So I just kind of put this as like, okay, now Darkseid is here, but also as an opponent, but also they're bringing back Superboy and Supergirl, and they're bringing back old members of the Legion. So for those that actually were invested at one point or another with certain Legionnaire members, they get to see them again in here. So I think that's where this helped put not just Darkseid on the map, but kind of make this an event for the Legion of Superheroes, where it actually helped that group of heroes title-wise, at least for the time.
Well, and you also got to see Mordru and Computo and Validus, so you got to see some of the main Legion villains in here too. So that was it was kind of really almost like a primer, to get you interested.
If you talk about a primer, I know we're going to go a little bit off topic here, but there is a few years ago, I say a few years, probably less than 10. There was a really good Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes cartoon that used to be on Cartoon Network, at least over here in the UK. That's out on DVD and Blu-ray now. So if you're interested, and you want to find out a little bit more about some of these characters like Lightning Lad and Saturn Girl are always on that show. So you do get an idea of the scope of how Legion can be, and they do have other characters in like Timberwolf and stuff like that. So it's a good opportunity for you to go back and kind of revisit, I suppose, something that's so different. Darkseid is Darkseid. I totally get that. It's an interesting point you made about the Kirby element, Bud, because for those that don't know, Jack Kirby created Darkseid. So with Jack Kirby leaving DC, what happened to Darkseid? And then lo and behold, here he is.
Yeah, there was Darkseid first. Thanos came, but Thanos, and you can correct me, Bud, if I'm wrong.
Yeah,
the Cosmic Cube happened before this event, right? So with Thanos, so that made him, that elevated him cosmically within Marvel to a cosmic threat.
Yeah.
So we basically have the same thing with Darkseid here years later in the Legion. So ironically, Darkseid becomes a cosmic threat in the future before we get to read his stories of the past later on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it is really really interesting when I think about Jack Kirby. They pretty much giving him his little corner of the DC universe to create stuff in, and he does a bunch of stuff while he's there for a few years, and then he leaves, goes back to Marvel, and I bet you anything DC was probably sitting there going, what do we do with these characters? We've never had any characters like these. They don't really, they had to find a way to make them fit in the DC universe proper, and I think they did a good job with Apocalypse and making. Now, I mean, Darkseid is the cosmic threat in DC now, so
Yeah, I mean, up to this point, he was in the Superpowers cartoon. You would catch him there. And in the comic books, later on you have Legends and what have you. So he's been around.
Yeah.
There you go. All right. So the Great Darkness Saga. There you go. It's all in there. It is an absolute epic story of its time. There's lots of verbiage in there. There's lots of words. It's going to take you some time. Yep. This is book a day's holiday in, book a day holiday vacay. In fact, you know what? You should do that anyway to check out these 3 series. So There you go.
True story.
True story. True that. Oh, 13th. I've just noticed your little picture there. Oh, bless you. All right. Okay. Time for one of our adverts. I'm not going to ask you guys because I know which one you're always going to plumb for. So we're going to change this up sooner or later. But here it is, the ever popular advert for Crisis in the Toyverse. There we go. All right. All done and done. So next up on our eventful non-events is Bud's choice. And of course, Bud being the Marvel man that he is, we are going no further than
the Kree-Skrull War.
Let's start us off.
That's I want to say that's arguably the first Marvel event, really. You know,
right.
I really, you know, besides what other event can you really kind of think of other than maybe the first appearance of Galactus and the Silver Surfer was probably a big 3-issue type event. But I would argue on that end that any issue from Lee and Kirby on FF from like 1963 to 1965 is probably.
Was it Death of Gwen Stacy not an event?
No, I don't think so.
I agree. Just another offense. All right, so let me give some credits where credits are due before we let Bud go nuts on this one.
Sure.
This covers Avengers number 89 through 97, volume 1, written by Roy Thomas, art by Sal Buscema, who is fantastic every single time. Neil Adams is in there, John Buscema's in there. You've got some inks by Sam Granger, Sal Buscema, George Roussos, and Tom Palmer. You've got letters by Simon Rosen, Mike Stevens, and Art Simic. If anybody is wondering why I didn't give the shout out for colours for Legion, it's because there was no credits on the books and I couldn't find them when I looked online. So apologies for anyone who thinks I have missed out on error. All right, there you go. So what's that? 9 issues?
Yeah.
A 9-issue story? Wow.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? I mean, when I was looking at the Kree-Skrull War proper, right? To me, the Kree-Skrull War isn't really the thing happening in these books. The Kree-Skrull War really is kind of the backdrop for these stories to happen during. There's not a lot of Kree versus the Skrulls. You know, there's not a lot of well, there isn't. There's not a lot of ships blasting. There's not a lot of stuff going on. The Avengers are pretty much dropped in. You don't even find out that the Skrulls are at war with the Kree until the 4th part. The first 3 parts were basically, I think, a wrap up of the Captain Marvel book, which got canceled out from under them. And then they had to wrap up Captain Marvel storylines in another book, which ended up being Avengers. So here, they're able to incorporate, you know, the Scarlet Witch, Quicksilver, Vision into Captain Marvel and Rick Jones's storyline, and kind of almost wrap it up kind of neatly. But you don't even see or hear the Skrulls in the first few issues here. It's Captain Marvel. They come up against the Sentry and then Ronan the Accuser. You kind of have the Supreme Intelligence, who for some reason is called the Intelligence Supreme throughout this storyline. They mix it up a little bit, and then they ended up, you know, in the second part, they end up chasing that Sentry to Antarctica, where there's a jungle. It's not the Savage Land, which I'm telling you, the first probably couple of times I've ever read that book, I just kind of thought it was the Savage Land. But upon multiple readings, you realize that Ronan the Accuser created that jungle out of nothing. And they run into Hank Pym as Yellow Jacket and the Wasp, who were doing some previously explained in the Avengers. Wasp and Yellow Jacket had left the group to go do studies in Alaska, and this is where they find them. Almost like a kind of a throwaway story, because at the end of this story, Yellow Jacket and Wasp leave the Avengers. At least Yellow Jacket does for an issue until he comes back as Ant-Man, which is a little confusing because over in Marvel Premiere, as soon as he left here, he got his own title in Marvel Premiere and had his own stories going on where he became Ant-Man again. So that's how that's explained. It's not really explained.
And you're worried about the Legion of Superheroes.
I know. But it seems like there's, when you read the story, you get one issue of Yellow Jacket, they leave, and then there's an issue, and then the next issue he's back as Ant-Man, and no explanation. So I just kind of felt like there was something that needed to be explained. So the artwork, and you would talk about house styles and stuff. Sal Buscema is really, I want to say at this point, it's really kind of the beginning of the Sal Buscema era in Marvel. He is penciling absolutely everything.
Yeah,
at this point.
This is, and you've said in the past, and we alluded to it earlier with Legion. You've said in the past that when we look back at some older DC books, they look older than they are in comparison to the art of Marvel at the same time.
Yes.
So when you cast your mind back to stuff like this, I kind of agree with you. But for me, I think Sal Buscema, and I'll say this right now, Sal Buscema is one of my favorite artists of Marvel of all time, right? But because he's drawn so much stuff, Marvel's house style never changed for so long.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, because even like this is 1971, even in 1978, 79, Sal Buscema's drawn and his stuff looked exactly the same. Yep. He kind of got to a level and stayed there. And even Sal Buscema was drawing Peter Parker Spider-Man well into the 90s, you know?
Well, Peter Parker's in this panel, look, bottom right there.
That's Rick Jones, you bastard.
13th, that's Peter Parker, right?
Looks exactly like Peter Parker.
He could only wish he could be.
So this story really is about Rick Jones and Captain Marvel, the whole arc. And they follow both characters throughout. By the fourth or fifth chapter, I can't even remember now. Half of the Avengers are in space. They take off with the Ronan. He escapes the Avengers and they end up in space, and that's when they kind of get involved in the rest of that storyline. But throughout the storyline, you're running into the Inhumans. There's a lot of history between the Kree. I think the storyline's very, very lopsidedly focused on the Kree, and there's not a lot of Skrulls going on, unless the Skrulls are more made out to be the antagonists, even though the Kree are villains just as much in the storyline, right? So for me, I think this is really Roy Thomas's first kind of epic showdown, really, as far as what he gets to show off what he can do, really. And you know, this story ends with Roy Thomas going back to his old stomping grounds. He's an expert in World War II stuff, so he sends Rick Jones back in time and pulls out the invaders, and he gets to pull out some old characters that had never appeared in modern age Marvel, such as the original Vision and Blazing Skull, and a couple of other characters that I can't remember the names of, but they appear briefly. And this is actually the first appearance of the invaders. They're not named the invaders in this last part, but for me, I mean, there's no real more epic storyline, or even when you look back on it, because I don't think when they were reading it at the time, I don't know if they really kind of gave it a name, right? They didn't call it the Kree Skrull War. No one called it that until way after.
So it got trade paperbacked.
Right. And so I don't even think anybody really noticed like how involved or how many parts there were because of, the fact that the Skrulls didn't show up till chapter 4. And then they switched artists mainstream, and you get Neil Adams in here.
I was just going to talk about that a little bit, actually. So this is kind of like the epitome of an uneventful event if you haven't got a name for it. Neil Adams. This is Neil Adams' book, right? So Professor 13th, we know Neil Adams from his Batman work, from his stuff on X-Men back in the number-wise in the 60s. For X-Men before it got cancelled. I've looked through this particular issue, and this does not look like Neil Adams. What's happened?
I think it's a victim right now of the house styles that were going on at the time. There was a lot of artwork that's just being done and then retouched before it gets to the publisher. I know. There's there's several covers going around. Like if you look at, there's a Captain Marvel cover that was done by Starlin with an obvious head by John Romita.
Honestly, I think Neil Adams' art was more prominent in issue 93.
Yes.
You could 93. You could see that it's definitely Neil Adams' touch, if you will. The other one, I agree with you guys. That was a scroll of Neil Adams.
93. Let's have a look, because I have it just to hand. Because I am super organized. 93. Boom.
You can tell in the way that he draws the Vision, especially Iron Man.
There's an inking gaff in this whole issue. And it's Vision's cowl, Vision's top helmet piece is colored yellow the entire issue. And I was waiting for them to change it back, like realize that they messed it up. But every single panel, it's yellow. So.
Yeah, I see your point. It's very much. This is more like the Neil Adams that we've come to know and love.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and this is a huge. I mean, you could see how almost disjointed that the storyline is, right? Because this is a gigantic Ant-Man issue where he goes inside the Vision and saves the Vision from what what kind of ailed him. We didn't really know at the time until you get to the end of the book and realize that they were attacked by the original Skrulls from the issue 2 of the Fantastic Four.
Not the ones that were cows. No?
Yes, those same ones. They turn back into members of the Fantastic Four and fight them. So,
it's they were, moving around in the Avengers title.
Let that hang there for a minute.
Yeah, I'm done with that one. All right, okay. So 13th, what was your take on the whole Kree Skrull war that was not named?
Yeah, the unnamed war.
Yeah, colors on this one were awful.
Yeah,
I don't know if it's the digital version, but
that looks like the scanned version.
Yeah, man, that looks terrible.
I think there ultimately, with the Krees and the Skrulls, 2 alien races that had been involved in the pages of Marvel, especially with the Skrulls, right in the early days of the FF, and then you have the Kree later on. By this time, people knew who they were because thanks to Ronan the Accuser, that's when the Kree debuted in the pages of Fantastic Four. So the superhero community knew that they were not alone in the universe, but now you have these 2 probably more popular alien races within Marvel, and the depiction was that they are at odds, and it made things kind of interesting for intergalactic war, and Earth was just caught in the middle. So I think that was a good thing, and I think here you probably learned that just how serious the Skrulls and the Kree would take things, and again, the Avengers, the Earth's mightiest heroes, now are aware, like, oh man, this is a really bad thing going on between these two, and it affects us. And the fact that we could have scrolls right next to us at any time, right, because they were kind of depicted as villains.
Yeah.
You know, so that raised a lot of concern. And the fact that the Kree were they had no mercy, the actual Kree, when it came to building their empire. And you'll learn about that in the pages of Captain Marvel, because he wasn't always you know, high and mighty either. You know, he was a dedicated Kree soldier, and they were out there, you know, conquering planets. So I think basically it helps knowing all of that before you head into this, because this story is all over the place, you know, like you guys alluded to. For their flagship book of Avengers, I mean, it's all over the place, but at the end of the day, it's just another day in the life of the war of the Krees and the Skrulls, and it wasn't going to end.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I feel like where maybe giving this the title of the Kree-Skrull War after the fact kind of lumped in the fact. I mean, Roy Thomas was just writing a story, right?
Right.
And I really do think that the Kree-Skrull War was kind of like a backdrop for the regular stories he was writing, and they just kind of wrapped it all up into what we know now as the Kree-Skrull War, but they weren't calling it back in 69, 70, 71.
So it's interesting because I mean the Kree and the Skrull. It's only been recently, especially in the movies, where the Skrulls have been shown to be a little bit more peaceful. You know, the Skrulls in the comic books are still bad guys, and the Kree are still bad guys. Although are they really bad guys, or are they just doing what they want to do? It depends on your motive. So when you look at it from this point of view, you've got two different bad sets of bad guys going up against the Avengers and the Inhumans, but the Inhumans don't get involved because they're against the Avengers. So you kind of like, you know, there's this kind of screams that there's lots of things going on, but nothing ever gets resolved. It's that kind of continual Marvel illusion of change stuff. I mean, just to change from Yellow Jacket to Giant Man to Ant-Man in the space of 3 or 4 issues. Yeah, so
well, this got the Avengers thinking a lot more differently after the events that happened in this book. And that's for sure. So despite all the lineup changes throughout times and their personal problems and what have you, you know, here they have to get it together, because if they don't, Earth will pay the price, just because 2 warring empires, you know, Earth's in the way pretty much. They made Earth a battleground, and the Avengers are not going to stick up for that. And it's good to see the Avengers in this light. Other than that, you know, the script is tough to follow. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But artistically, yeah, you got all of these guys that were mentioned. They're all legends in their own right, and that was a real treat. Digging through these pages again.
Yeah, and Johnny, you should be happy. This is an early Carol Danvers appearance right there.
Yep.
Hey, I like Carol Danvers. I'm not gonna argue about that. You know,
So, before she ever became Ms. Marvel,
she was in what first appearance was it? Marvel Spotlight, I think it was.
Carol's first appearance was in Captain Marvel, I believe, or maybe Marvel Spotlight when Captain Marvel before he got his own book.
Number 13.
Was it really?
Look it up.
We're gonna believe him now.
I'm checking now. Carol Danvers first app is in fact Marvel Superheroes 13. Whoa!
Well, there we go.
There you go. Cool. Strike one for good old 13th with his bad jokes. Excellent.
That wasn't a joke. That was actually
it was true. Yeah. I did. You know, he says it 13 times. It's probably right once, right?
There you go.
All right. So we've had epics like the Great Darkness Saga and the fact that it brings back Darkseid. We've had epics like the Avengers, where it doesn't seem that connected at all to every issue. Pretty much like it is now, right, bud?
We can ignore what's going on currently in the Avengers. Thank you. Jason Aaron does.
Yeah.
Avengers, don't assemble.
Avengers, stay at home. All
I'm so
right.
embarrassed. I can't even defend it. Sorry.
All right. Okay. Well, fair enough. So we're going with my choice. My choice is up next, and for me, I say this all the time. This book is better than The Dark Knight Returns. People will laugh at me, but for me, this is the quintessential Batman story. This is Frank Miller at his best. This is Batman Year One, from Batman issues 404 to 407 in Volume 1, written by Frank Miller, art by David Mazzucchelli, colors by Richard Lewis, and letters by Todd Klein. Right. Okay. 13th. Batman Year One. What do you got to say about it?
Well, Batman Year One is probably the storyline that absolutely got me hook, line, and sinker into Batman. And I think that's exactly what Frank Miller and friends intended to do. So Batman had a long history, many decades up to this point, but we all knew what was happening. Things were getting darker in comics, and not only that, you've had so many other events, so many retcons, not just for Batman, but so many other characters. It's like, how do we make Batman, fresh for readers and get them to come back to us, right? Because let's face it, sales of Batman books suffered for quite some time until he got darker. You have Batman Year One coming out. Very, very simple plot. The title again gives it away. Year One. This gives you a day in the life of Bruce Wayne before he even puts on the Batman uniform, the Bat costume. It also gives you a day in the life of Jim Gordon, coming from Chicago to Gotham City to join the police force. So it's kind of like a prequel, really, of the Batman mythos. And it was brilliantly done. The second you read the script, and again, the script can be wordy at times, but it really, really does a great job of just bringing you into the story, feeling what's happening, like a day in a life. Like you get to see Jim Gordon, like, hey, learning his way around, how bad the crime in Gotham is, how corrupt Gotham is from top to bottom. But it never loses sight of Bruce Wayne, his mission to become the best that he can be, not to steal anything from the army slogan, but really to be the best that he can be at trying to fight crime because of what happened to his parents. But what I love about it, probably the most, and admire the most about it, is just how much of an amateur Batman was and how they presented him to be one during this point in time, because he studied so much, he trained so much, he was obsessed. But at the end of the day, you can have all of those things, but once you step onto the field to play the game, it's a different story. And you see that with Batman. And I that's what really, really got me interested in Batman in general. So the ambiance, the environment, the darkness, like the different contrasts in color with Frank Miller's art really just sold you on a day in the life of Gotham. This book really has it all. There's what do you call it? An affair with Jim Gordon. You get to see Selena Kyle before she puts on the Catwoman costume. It has everything that it still respects the very first issues of Batman, or his first appearances. But it just presents it to you with a different dynamic and a different environment. So this book really was responsible for making me a Batman fan for life, pretty much. So
cool.
Legendary in my opinion, but I don't find too many people that'll disagree with that.
Yeah, cool. Excellent. Professor, Batman Year One.
Oh, I mean, yeah, this is one of the quintessential Batman stories that has ever been told. This is, I mean, other than Dark Knight Returns, is what made Frank Miller a legend. In almost like retelling origin stories, right? He made his mark on Daredevil, a similar character to Batman, if we want to be honest. And over here, it just takes the original and just turns it on its ear. This book, and I'm going to say, Bruce is not the main character in this Batman
Agreed.
Year One. He's a side character that he appears, when he has to in the story. This is very much a Jim Gordon story for 4 issues, and they don't really take the focus off of Jim. And when you do see Batman, it's how he's interacting with Jim and how they're establishing their relationship. And to me, I like that, because that kind of gave you more of the feeling of the crime setting, and just basically how is Batman going to fix everything that's wrong in the city. Because just from watching Jim, Jim is going to do everything he can, but he is only a man. At some point they need Batman, and that's what really kind of gives this story life. I love the fact that they have the dates, right? So you see time moving throughout, and the key, one of the key things of the movement of time is the pregnancy, right? So of the birth of Barbara, right? Now
James,
is it James?
Yeah. James.
So as Barbara comes after?
Well, there's a bit of a snafu with
so that's
Barbara.
One of the questions that I had, right? That's one of the questions. Because Barbara is now Jim's daughter, right?
Yeah.
But used to be the niece.
Correct.
So what's the story here?
So 13th, you'll have to correct me if I get this wrong. The way it kind of works is Frank Miller, when doing this book, kind of got a little bit messed up somewhere along the line, and he thought that Barbara was Jim's wife. That's why Jim's wife in this book is called Barbara. All right. Yep. At the time, the continuity was that Barbara Gordon was Jim's niece. Her parents died in a car crash, and Jim adopted her. Right. It then got retconned somewhere along the line that Barbara was Jim's actual daughter.
So we don't.
But James comes first.
But we don't know. We don't know when that got retconned.
I would say it was probably sometime just after this, but I'd have to. I'm not sure.
When did Killing Joke come out?
87. To be honest,
was that prior to was in Killing Joke? She's his daughter, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Also, remember when Killing Joke debuted, no one knew if that was going to be continuity yet.
Okay, so I would say probably post crisis.
Yep.
Batgirl is Jim's daughter.
yeah, exactly right.
Okay,
that's what I would go with.
Yeah.
So
Jim Jr. is definitely not the High Baby, aka High Father.
So I would just
Boss Baby Darkseid.
To answer your question, Killing Joke came out in 88, and Year One came out. I think it came out beforehand. No, same year, 88. Yeah, same year. So this is like such a. Actually, hold on a second, because that's a trade. When did Batman? They would do this on the fly. That's how cool we are. 4 come out. That's the first appearance. Okay, so Batman 4 came out in 87.
Okay.
They then got trade paperbacked in 88.
Yeah, so I mean, they were knee deep in retelling all the post-crisis origin stories, right? So they needed to retell, Superman, Man of Steel, and they had Batman Year One right around the same time. So, it was this is where they messed up Hawkman. This is where they messed up everybody back in the late 80s.
Hawkman was messed up way before then.
Yeah, I mean, all this was done in an effort really to kind of say, look, we're getting outsold here. The sales of the copies were just not flying off the shelves like they used to. And unfortunately, Batman is a premier title for DC, and even Batman took a hit. until it got darker, and thanks to Frank Miller, it helped.
Well, you got to remember, around this time, Detective Comics was almost cancelled.
Yep.
Detective Comics was almost cancelled in the 80s, and that's why Alan Grant, along with John Wagner for a couple of issues, but Alan Grant mainly, and Norm Brayfogle got the gig, was because, you know what, let's try something different. We've got, the styling is so dramatically different. In one issue, you've got Batman and Jason Todd Robin talking about being old chum, like they do on the 60s show. The next issue, you've got Norm Brayfogle and his big capes going on and all sorts of crazy stuff. And you're like, the change is so
the two
dramatic.
ears.
Yeah, exactly. So, and they kind of took that. And then, of course, the Batman movie came out in '89, which just absolutely catapulted everything through the roof when it came to bats. But no, some good questions there.
Yeah.
Good questions. For me, there's just, we talked about being intimidated when you look at Legion. When I first saw this book, and I picked up as a trade paperback years ago, when I first picked up this book, it was the lettering that intimidated me. I was like, whoa, look how much effort I've got to put in to read this book. Yeah, I've got to read joined up writing.
They don't even teach cursive in school anymore.
Exactly. So you're like, this is a lot of effort to read a Batman book. But man, when I started going through it, my socks were blown off. Absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt. So many good little bits in here. Thermite in his bat belt, which is also in the Dark Knight Returns. Selena and the cats, great. How he gets out of the building, fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I love how they show the kind of the origin of Catwoman in this, and also you see Harvey just kind of running around as a lawyer. I love that stuff when you kind of see, like, before you know what's coming, but you don't have to, you don't have to worry about it in this story.
Yeah, it's kind of like little nods to the continuity, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then you go through all this. It's fantastic artwork, really good. You get some really good phrases, some really good lines. He has the guy on the balcony. Ooh, there's the affair. Tut. He says things like, "Sometimes I share pain with people like you," and you're like, "Oh, there it is." Yeah, and then you feel the menace of it all. And of course, as it ends, you have where's the last page? I love the last page. There it is. And that's it. You're absolutely right. It's a Jim Gordon story, but he's got a problem with some guy going to poison the water. But it's all right. I've got a friend coming. And you're like, "Wow, this is the first Batman Joker story getting set right there." So I think it's a really good. It's a really good book. I think it's really clever. It's done really well, and you got to think that even now that story actually existed in the comic books, very much like the Darkness Saga and the Kree Skrull non-war. It actually occurred in the comic books. This wasn't an event that was planned for trade. This is in the comic books.
Well, the success of this launched into a bunch of different characters having a year one retelling of their origin stories too.
Exactly. I mean, and Batman went through up to year 3, which was
without renumbering or anything like that. So I think that's an interesting point to make there.
That's true. Yeah.
So you can kind of call it just a slight nudge or not a retcon, but just a little slight reboot.
Yeah, we're going to talk about like minor changes within the story, within the continuity of the already established universe, and you can kind of make little tweaks and changes as you go, and people and the fans bought it. And I
can tell you, like, all the conventions that I've been to, if you see Batman Year One, it doesn't stay up there for long. So readers and fans definitely still gravitate to this story.
One of the things I loved about looking at these books this week was that there was no crossover.
Mm-hmm.
It was a Legion book, it was an Avengers book, and it was a Batman book. Nowadays, you get like, oh, there's a story going on in Thor, but it crosses all the way over into Daredevil. When do Thor and Daredevil ever meet? It never happens hardly. But because there's a story going on, it's going to cross over. And it's like, no, it just makes no sense. All right, so
Yep.
even though we could say that the Avengers one didn't have much of a cohesiveness towards the Kree-Skrull War, it is actually cohesive to what was going on in Avengers at the time with the different things. So, you know,
it's a big difference from today, where if you're going to tell a storyline, you have to take it to the side and give it its own one of 7 issues with all these sidebars and then tie-ins, and the next thing you know, you have a small half box just for one event.
We have an Avengers story going on. I wonder what's happening with Spider-Man in the corner of during this Avengers story. It's silly. It's not needed.
And what I find, one of the things I find awful about the current event storytelling is that if you decide that you're just going to buy the event books, invariably something major is going to happen in one of the tie-ins. So you could be reading issue 1. Oh yeah, okay. Issue 2, everything's changed. Issue 3, why is that character dead? Issue 4, why is that character back alive? And you're like, what's going on? You know, and it's frustrating because, you know, there's only so much. Wallets can only hack so much money, right?
Yeah. I like this era of time where no one said, hey, we're going to start Batman and cancel it and then start this story as Batman #1 again. Can you imagine? It wasn't even a thought.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's crazy, isn't it? It's how the market changed. I remember reading somewhere that if a comic book had a high number on it, readers used to buy it because it meant it was a successful book.
Right.
Nowadays, people only buy #1s. And it's like, okay, well.
Yeah, I mean it's the change of the thought of the people that are buying comics now, right? That's when I was a kid and I bought, like, my first comic book that I ever bought was Avengers 246. I was excited because that meant there were 245 other stories that I could go back and read. You know, and now if you were to go into the store and pick up issue 246 of Spawn or something, you would be intimidated by, oh my God, there's that many stories I have to read to catch up. I don't want to do that. You know, it's the way everybody thinks now.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that I think Batman Year One is probably the greatest Batman jumping on point in recent history.
I will agree with you. Yes,
I will agree with you on that indeed. There was a 0 year from the Snyder Capullo, which whilst was fantastic, looked great, didn't add anything. It didn't change the way that people looked at Batman the way that Year One did. So there you go. All right, so 3 classic eventful non-events for you to go and chase down. All 3. I know we haven't gone through prices because all 3 are in trade paperbacks. So if you're just going to buy the book to read, go check out the trade paperbacks. It's probably the cheapest, easiest way to get the books, to be fair.
It's definitely the cheapest, easy way to get those books.
If you're looking at the Marvel books, of course, you can use the Marvel Universe Online app, where you can pay how much? Something like $9 or $10.
You know what? Your best bet, especially if you're a big fan of Marvel, is what I do. Is it's like $59 a year for the whole year. Okay. And so you get a whack of, you're getting it for like $7 a month at that point.
So there you go. Check that out. It is available to UK subscribers, unlike the DC one. Just saying, you can't call yourself DC Universe app if you only apply to one bloody country. But enough about that. So that's it, Professor. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. Watch No Prize Podcast. We have a new episode coming up on Tuesday.
What do you talk about on there?
Heroes Regurgitated.
Okay, cool. I've got to say, I didn't mind the Gwen Stacy book.
We do talk. What's more important, we talk about the first 2 episodes of Loki. So
I fell asleep during both of those. That's how excited I was about it.
Oh boy.
Okay.
Even my wife, who fancies Loki, fell asleep during the second one. So
there's a lot of Mark Grunwald shoutouts, I will say.
All right. Okay. So you will be happy then. Excellent.
I am happy.
And of course, don't forget the TDC, the Definitive Crusade, for everything that is DC. A show that was once started by the 13th Crusader. There you go. Back in the day. All right, all that's left is, of course, don't forget to check out UCPM for all those shows and loads more, including the Flip Side and the Jank Think Tank for all you Magic the Gathering fans. So, as we record, Wales are probably getting beaten by Italy. I am now saying adieu, and I'm off to watch the second half. So, guys, see you in a couple of weeks. This is Joining the Machine Hughes saying adios.
See ya.